Remember when we used to talk about the paperless office, e-commerce,
signing a contract on paper,
and even giving out an agent's pager number? We're in a mobile world.
We're in a mobile world, and your business needs to be too.
It's a digital world. Workflow is changing, and so too are our experiences.
There are over 350 prop tech players right now
competing for the space.
How do you keep up with it all? And what's next? Welcome to Founders,
a new podcast with Josh Phegan
on the future of workflow in real estate. One of the really important conversations for any real estate agent is to think about how they iron out any of the challenges that buyers and sellers will go through in the buying and selling process. And as a part of that conversation, we've started to see a huge migration of agents actually really thinking differently about what a consumer is actually doing before, during, and post a transaction. What are some of the issues that they actually go through? How do we actually make it easier, faster, and better, and reduce the friction in a deal so a buyer can make a faster decision and a seller knows exactly what to do to make sure they can maximize their sale price? Today, we're joined by Rhys and Jon from Before You Bid. We're going to talk a little bit about how that actually works inside of the marketplace. Rhys, we're going to kick off with you. What is Before You Bid? Explain to us about the problem that you solve inside of the Australian residential real estate space.
Yeah, so we've really focused and narrowed in on that building and pest inspection, strata reports in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, but we'll stick with building and pest to just give a bit of an idea for those listeners exactly how we do it. So typically, certainly when we started 8 years ago, buyers, it was all buyer beware. What we've done is kind of flipped it on its head. Agents contributing either to the full cost or a portion of the cost of the report, having it available for buyers at a cheaper price. So it's easier to transact on the properties that they're selling.
And that's a really important conversation because, Jon, I know that, for agents, there was like kind of an era, right, where, and you might remember this, where you'd actually have property listings online that didn't have floor plans. And then there was some that did have floor plans. And then now we've kind of got to a position of equalization in the residential sales field where every property's got a floor plan now. And we're actually starting to see this with the conversation around pest and building reports and strata where it's appropriate, where people are actually saying, well, hang on a second, if I'm going to go and buy a property, because it's so competitive to go and buy a property across Australia, I might literally try to buy 4 or 5 of them and to actually get the one that I end up buying. And actually the costs associated with getting a pest and building inspection on every single one of those kind of came prohibitive. And I started to get really angry and upset as a process. And so what we've seen here is a lot of agents have said, hey, you know what, how do we make it easier and better for the consumer? Because we know they're probably going to try on 4 or 5 properties before they buy the one they do. How do we actually streamline that process? Talk to us a little bit about how you're starting to see this move from being the differentiator to now being the norm across great residential real estate practice.
Yeah, well, Josh, I've actually seen this. I was at Domain for many years and, we used to consider that the portal was the first inspection. So what was really important was photography. It had to be professional. It had to look good. And then video came along. A few agents got into video, many stayed away, but then that also became a part of the campaign process. You mentioned floor plans. Up until about 5 or 6 years ago, people used to check in buyers with pen and paper. Now they all do it digitally, right? So, this is the same. I see exactly the same thing happening here. And to your point, where it was a nice to be to have a building and pest inspection report in the campaign. Look, building and pest inspections have always been around. It's been part of the transaction process for many, many years, but it was always purchased by the buyer at the negotiation end of the campaign. Now what we see value in is agents actually getting it up front. They can see the condition of the property. They can know about the property that they're selling, which gives them an advantage. And it also makes them look professional in front of buyers.
I think about making it easy, right? And this is one of the great challenges. You've got probably 2 camps here, Rhys, and this is an interesting one. You've got the agent who's like, nah, let's just not get a pest and building report and hope that no one does during the course of the campaign. And then you get that awkward phone call on a Thursday night before Saturday's auction. Oh, can we get a pest and building inspection done tomorrow on Friday? The pest and building inspector wants to walk through on Friday night at 6:30 p.m. is the only time they can do it. And you're out there hoping on a wing and a prayer that you're actually going to be able to get that consumer into a position that they're going to be able to bid on Saturday morning. And then you've got another group of agents who say, well, hang on a second, you know what? We believe in full disclosure and we would rather know that if there's an issue. Now, it's up to the vendor at that point whether or not they want to fix that issue. So they might make the decision to say, hey, look, we're going to go and remedy that, or we're going to go and get a quote for a professional to remedy that so that a $1,000 issue doesn't turn into a $50,000 negotiation item with a buyer. And I think that's a really important conversation, is starting to think about it. So, Rhys, we're going to walk through some of the friction points, if it's okay, that I get from agents, and I want to see how you would handle those friction points. First friction point.
We're on.
Yeah, okay, great. So here we go. It didn't take long, right? So first friction point is they say, okay, mate, I don't want to know if there's an issue in the property. My belief is they're going to find out at some point in time, and we're better to bring it up early, or to at least have a third party who's actually given some advice on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you've kind of answered it before when they say, I don't want to know what's going on with the property. Certainly when a buyer gets a building and pest inspection report and the building and pest inspector comes back to them with all these issues, they're going to overstate, and not through the inspector's fault necessarily, but they'll say to the inspector, what's the maximum this could cost me as a problem? Like, oh, it might be 4,000, might be 5,000, then there's 3 or 4 of those issues. Cool, we're at $25,000. Now, if you've got an inspector, you've got the report up front, you can have a real conversation with them if you want to. And there's 2 schools of thought here. I'll let Johnny speak about how Will Ainsworth approached it compared to how David Walker approached it, which is really interesting. They're good mates, one in the Geelong market, one in the Wronga market, but I'll let Johnny tell that story. But when you've got an inspector who's got this report up front, you can have a genuine conversation with them about, look, how much might this cost to fix? And you're going to find it's a lot less than when they're maximising it. So you can control that negotiation. You can control price chipping. You've set the reserve. People download the report. Oh, but there's this and this issue. Yeah, that's why the reserve is at 1.4, not at 1.45.
So just with regards to Will, Will called us about a month ago and he said, guys, I want to tell you about a great situation that happened last weekend. I had an auction on a Saturday at 10:30. I had 4 bidders. At 11:30, a 5th buyer came along, had not seen the property, requested a contract for sale. Then 15 minutes later rang back and said, look, I really want to bid on this property, but I just haven't seen the building and pest report. So I just don't have the confidence to come along today. Will sent them a link to download the report within a minute. They got that report. They had the confidence. They turned up. They pushed the bidding. The bidding stopped at 8:01. That 5th bidder came in and took the bidding to 8:37. So by having that report, he made the vendor an extra $36,000. But to Rhys's point, 2 types of agents. Will's a great example. And I asked Will, how do you actually get a vendor to agree to pay a couple of $100 for a report? And he said, well, look, I just find that it's compulsory. You have to have it. And I don't actually look at the report. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't want to be the expert in, issues or defects or anything like that. But by having that report, if a buyer does download it and there are issues in that report they want to talk about, at least I've got access to it. And I thought that was really interesting. And, the David Walker example, David's on the other side of it, where he wants to get it up front. He wants to know exactly what's going on with it. He wants to get 4 or 5 quotes around repairing the issues. And what that means is that he can have the right conversation with the vendor and right conversations with buyers, and he's on the front foot at every stage and he's in total control. It's
fascinating because you go and have a look at what's happening here in Sydney and most recently with all of the large apartment constructions and the number of defects in some of these brand new buildings, right? And so even in a brand new building, there's going to be an issue. So a house that was built in 1930, there's also going to be an issue, but you should be aware that that's actually what you're buying and you should be a part of it. Now, the interesting conversation is that there was always, and this was interesting, is that people would say, Rhys, you know what, there's a difference about where the liability sits. So if the buyer pays for the report in its entirety, then the pest and building inspector will be more third party and literally will know that ultimately the liability sits there, that they can sue the pest and building inspector for any material misstatement. This has been cleaned up a lot. Tell us about how that objection is handled.
Yeah, so we very much spent a lot on legals on this. Very much want every single party to be protected when using before you bid. So the buyer can then download the report. They're accepting that they're engaging someone from a third party, and they can pay. Look, we've got a few different models, but if they pay a monetary balance at the end of the campaign, that report will transfer into their name effectively for insurance purposes. So if something is missed, a material item that should have been in there, then they've got recourse against that inspector.
I think that's a really important conversation, to just say, hang on a second, it's not like the pest and building inspector's doing a special report. They're actually doing the report as they would underneath, or their own understanding of exactly what they need to do. producing that high quality report, and whoever buys that, it literally then is going to transfer for the ability, if there is any material misstatement, to be able to pursue. Now, the interesting conversation about that is that then from an agent's point of view, let's talk a little bit about the funding. Now, what we're seeing that the best agents here are doing is they're adding it to their vendor paid marketing schedules. It's a line item. It's actually a really important conversation to iron out any of the friction in the deal and to make it really easy from a buyer's point of view. But there are a couple of funding options that are available. Can you talk us through what tends to be the most prevalent and what are the options that are available to an agent when selling it to a vendor in this process?
So we've got 17 of the top 20 REB agents in the country using our product. The other 3 do get reports up front. They just don't do it through us, but we'll get them eventually. But that goes back to your arguments on why an agent should or shouldn't. The top 20 do it. So I'm sure it would work for everyone. Yep. The most popular model is when you get $3.99 up front from the vendor. Then it's available at a discount for buyers, quite a low price point. And the reason you want it at a low price point and what agents start using us because they've got a building and pest problem. They continue using us because they want a data solution. So whenever someone downloads that report, they know I've got this person as a hot buyer and a potential hot seller. So the best way that agents use it is get the maximum upfront through the vendor that you're comfortable with. So it's a low price point as possible for those buyers.
And is there an option for the vendor to pay it completely upfront and or for the buyer to pay it completely upfront?
Yeah, I'll say 20% of our reports that come through, the agents do get the full amount up front and have it available to download for free for buyers. I will add to that, though, of the 17 that I just mentioned, not one of them has it free for buyers. And they all want to see the credit card come out from the person who's gone through the open home because they've got so many people going through these open homes. If you've got, if you're a top agent with 5-6 listings on a Saturday, you might have 70, 80 people go through your open homes. And when we say, look, here's the 8 people who downloaded that strata report or that building and pest inspection report. And by the way, it's 80% likely that's the buyer of your property. It helps those top agents, focus in on the people they need to focus in on.
And this is a great one, John, because, one of the things that we talk about is digital intent of a consumer, right? So I had an agent say to me once, he goes, I had this buyer walk through on Saturday and at the end of the open house, they handed back the brochure and they said, oh, not for me, mate. And then literally, they then found that on Sunday afternoon, that same buyer was actually on the property listing on the website buying a copy of the pest and building report. And he goes, literally, it's so crazy because I had an offer come in on that Sunday afternoon from an alternate buyer and I was nearly at the point where I was ready to recommend that offer to the seller. But all of a sudden, I've seen that there's this digital intent that someone's actually buying a copy of the pest and building report. And I've said, whoa. I know that best practice is to call everyone, but not everyone has returned your call. And so I've done my best. I think everything's great. And then all of a sudden I see that there's this digital download of this report. And I think, hang on a second, we're going to need to wait till Monday morning for me to make sure that literally that I've really got to that buyer who hasn't returned my call because I think there's actually some more in this. And he goes, we actually went there, we ended up getting more out of that buyer. But interesting enough, he goes, if I hadn't have had it available, I would have actually probably missed that buyer in the process. And it wasn't that I didn't have a good process, I just hadn't returned a call. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to sell it away because I've actually got a good offer on the table. John, talk to us a little bit about this, the movement about actually understanding how buyers work and the digital intent and what you're seeing in the data.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Josh, because you can't make assumptions about buyers, okay? Whatever they do or say at the open home is not necessarily their intention with regards to, the possible purchase of that property. It used to be that, a great indicator of the success of a campaign was how many contracts went out on the property. Now agents complain about the fact that buyers are just contract collectors. They'll give out 5 contracts on a Saturday. On Monday, they'll call all of those buyers. And most of the buyers are saying, oh, sorry, which property was this for? Because they've taken 3 or 4 contracts that day. And so
I reckon this came from the block because like a contract became a brochure. It's like, oh, yeah, get a contract. But the difference is now that if I'm going to go and spend, whatever it is, $49.89, $199, whatever it was for my report, and I know that varies in different marketplaces, right? That is actually now I'm showing my intent to say, I'll put some hard earned into this and I'm going to read it.
Yeah. Look, Josh, we look at the numbers and I've spoken to plenty of agents. Like I love calling agents just to ask them about certain campaigns because, there are campaigns where we will get, 10, 15 buyers who actually paid $49 or $59 for a copy of the report. And I asked the agent, how many people went through that campaign? Oh, there were 100, right? But they know, and we know traditionally that 80% of buyers or campaigns that have people downloading a copy of the report and paying for it, one of those buyers will go on to buy the property, right? So when we talk about intent, there's no stronger indicator of intent than when somebody purchases a copy of a building and pest report.
I can hear auctioneers around the country going, so how many buyers are registered to bid and how many have bought a copy of the pest and building report? Because I know that that's the one who's probably going to bid a little more.
Well, that's right.
But you look at Amit Nayak up at McGrath Parramatta in his speech at ARIC a few weeks ago, but he was just saying the pest and building is just one of those things he has to have on every single one of his campaigns because he went through every one of his processes. I think he was selling 60 or 70 properties a year. He was going through every one of his processes. He's like, where do I waste time? He's like, it's when they get their building and pest, I have to send someone out to open. His brother sometimes has to go to the open home and they go multiple times. Maybe there was 2 or 3 people who did this, or I'm in a calling off. I've got to wait for that report to be done. It's like, I need to cut this fat out of my process. And by doing that, he's now selling upwards of close to 200, I think, a year.
Founders is brought to you by Josh Phegan Digital. You know, when we were setting out to go and create Josh Phegan Digital, we just had this whole idea that we wanted training to be on demand. You know, and everything in our life is on demand. We just press play inside of the Netflix app. We press play on YouTube, play on Spotify. Why couldn't we just press play on training? And what we decided is we want to be like super relevant to real estate agents so that in under a couple of minutes each day, if you wanted to, you could upskill and you could grow in new ways. And so we decided that we were going to release this thing that we called The Edit, which is basically the latest in property news stories that's happening every week right the way around the country. So you could be incredibly sharp in your conversations with sellers. And then we built out the short courses, which was all about rapidly building skills, you know, whether or not it's about learning how to get better fees or to put on an assistant. And then we actually wanted to give you access to blueprints so you didn't have to wait for it every year. You could just watch it whenever you wanted and actually go from zero to hero around everything that it takes, from goal setting, self and energy management, what you're doing around prospecting, listing, negotiation, and actually just have a system for the way that you work. Together with, you know, getting really inspired by some of the best people in the industry with the black and white interviews. Josh Phegan Digital is available on iOS and also on Android. It's an incredible app and it gives you everything that you'll need to be a much better agent. It's time to switch on. And it's a pretty phenomenal thing because what you're trying to do is you're starting to think very differently about it. Another objection that I get from agents is that, oh, look, I've already got a pest and building supplier. I've already got a pest and building person that goes out and does my work. So why would I need to add a platform? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're a marketplace of building and pest and strata inspectors. So we've got about 450 at last count inspectors on our panel. So if there's ones you want to bring onto the panel and keep using them, that's absolutely fine with us as long as they're insured. We check a bunch of their qualifications. It is funny. Occasionally you ask for their qualifications and then they don't turn up and you have to let the agent know, look, you might be using someone you shouldn't be using. But look, for the most part, get their insurances, get their qualifications, get them on our panel. And we're all about the data around the inspection. So that's where our value add is. So what we're seeing, Josh, with people downloading our report, and we've just done this analysis and we're about to feed it through to some of our agents as well, is that 25% of people who download a report sell a property after downloading a report within the next 12 months. Up to another 15% have a property to sell if you find them something. So that's 4 in 10 people who download a report actually have a listing for you.
And in a world where everyone wants to know who's next, now you're actually really like mapping that process that, like, you know, they did that. And that's, you know, it's kind of interesting because you've probably just done that naturally and never really thought about making that a systemized process. But now when you're teaching junior Josh or the new people that are coming through in your organization, here's actually one way that we qualify buyers. And if a buyer buys a copy of the report and then goes on and then registers to bid at an auction, this is high intense stuff that literally, this here is the pointy end. So if we're in a really fast moving go market, we'll identify it. If we're in a very slow market, we'll also identify it. But now we've actually got a system that actually helps us to identify where those challenges are.
Yeah, that's right, Josh. And I think, you know, talking about when you go directly through an inspector, they're just not going to give you that data. You know, they're not going to tell you about, you know, what that buyer has or hasn't done or
They're an investor.
Like an investor. Yeah, we ask, are they going to live in the property? Are they an investor? That's really, you know, good intel because it drives your conversation with the buyers. So, you know, when it comes to the inspectors, you know, we look after the inspectors. We pay them every, you know, fortnight. There's no reason why an inspector shouldn't be on our panel. Again, we don't employ inspectors. There's that full independence. But we just want to make sure that everybody that is around the transaction is taken care of and that we can, you know, maximize the process.
So, Rhys, how long does it take for an inspector to get approved so they can go on the panel?
Oh, we can have it done that day within a few hours. It's how long they take to get the documentation to us. We're going to check their insurances, certain QBCC license up in Queensland, a few things like that we need to check. But once we have the documentation from them, they're up and running that day.
And in some respects, it's actually pretty amazing because they can actually open up their panel of agents that they might go and do work for, which substantially helps them to grow their business.
And the tech we implement into like BYB Assist and CRM integrations and integrating with their website, the tech we integrate with the agency actually cements that inspector with that agency in a much better way than they currently are.
So I know it's a little one, but if I'm an administrator or the operations person inside of a sales team and I'm in charge of getting one of these pest and building reports done on a property as a part of our process from when we've listed it before we actually get to the point of launch, how hard is it for me to organise that through the platform?
Yeah, so once we've set it up in VPA, set up invoicing, you just log in, put in the address, put in what report you're on, probably 4 clicks, and you've got an invoice sent to your inbox to chuck in with paying REA, domain, or your other things. You pay it at the end of the month, and as soon as you hit that button, it goes straight out to the preferred inspector in their app. We've built an app for them. They accept the job, book it in. You tell them whether you want them to contact you or they contact the owner, and then it's booked in. Usually, you have it in a couple of days, and
you immediately receive a QR code for that report, even before it's been done, so that you can start to push that out into your marketing. You're booking your signboard, you can put on the signboard, brochures that you're printing out, it's there. Because, look, the more buyers that pay to download a copy of that report, a download is a lead, right? So agents need to start to see every time a buyer downloads that report, that's a lead for me. They might be looking to sell, they're definitely looking to buy.
A buy-sell lead. There's an agent up in Brisbane, I don't know if you've heard of him, Phil Resnikov. I certainly hadn't heard of him. He's very much keeps to himself and just is really, really good at selling real estate. He sold 204 properties in the last 12 months. Doesn't put himself into any kind of awards or anything. He just picks up phones and sells properties. But I just remember chatting to him a little while ago. He's like, the reason you came into my life, my process, was because I had a building and pest problem. Now I just see you as a data solution. Because I actually go into listing presentations now and say, look, over the last 12 months, I've had 4,500 people go through my open homes. I've had 800 people download a building and pest inspection. And by the way, 60 of them are looking through for a 3-bed, 1-bath, just like yours. I've got the highest number of hot buyers in this market. So by listing with me, I'll get those 60 people to the first open home. So he's like now seeing it as a way to implement it and differentiate himself and even further himself from the pack in his area.
And geez, that's a really sharp conversation, isn't it? And I think that this is the interesting part because, what's screaming in my head is an old school saying, fix your follow-up failure. And so let's talk a bit about that. And, John, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about BYB Assist has actually helped agents because, you're there, it's a busy open for inspection. You're trying to get to everyone as much as you can. It's hit peak load. There's too many people coming through. What have you got in that area to be able to help agents?
Yeah, so we built BYB Assist. It integrates with the leading CRMs. It's an OFI, post-OFI SMS that goes out 45 minutes to an hour after the inspection. But essentially the reason we built it was so that it would ask the questions that agents don't have to at the open. So they've got more time to talk about or to pitch, and sell, the great things about that property. But the 4 questions we ask are, would you like a copy of the sales contract? Do you need a copy of the building and pest report? Do you require help with finance? And would you like an appraisal for your property? And we don't charge agents for that SMS. We pay for the SMSs. But what it means is that the agents just don't have to ask those questions when they're there, right? So we're just basically saying to buyers, look, the information that you need in order to make a decision fast on that day, the same day that you've seen it, that's what BYB Assist, really helps with.
So Rhys, this is amazing because it's about like standardization of customer experience, right? Regardless of whether or not you're the hottest buyer on that property pulling out a tape measure or whether or not you're the coldest buyer handing back a copy of the brochure, you're still going to get that opportunity. And you will find that people will opt in for different components. And that particular property might not have suited their requirements, but there might be a need for a market appraisal or I need some help on finance or, whatever those stories are. What is this data? Is giving you some incredible insights about helping agents to improve the number of email addresses, updating their email addresses, making sure they're clear about digital intent of consumers, updating those records inside of the CRM. There's a whole range of things that have come out of that process.
Yeah, well, so on those questions, Johnny's just run through the first two around the contract and the building and pest. If they take either of those things, we update the CRM directly. So it creates a bit of a batting order of, okay, we've had, going back to that, agent who's got 6 campaigns, 80 people go through, goes back to that batting order of like, well, here are the people who took the contracts. So let's say those 15 people who took the contracts, here's the agent who took the building and pest. And it's all in the CRM. You don't have to actually log into before you bid anymore. So it's all sitting in there. One thing we launched a few months ago, which is proved very, very popular, is updating email addresses. So around 52% of contacts in CRMs don't have an email address attached to them. So you could argue are pretty useless. If they say yes to that question 1 about a contract, we'll ask for an email address. When there isn't one, we'll update it automatically. On top of that, and this was a bit more difficult technically, but when they download a building and pest, if we pick up that mobile number doesn't have an email address in the CRM, we'll update that email address as well. So we ran this across Cunningham's, one of our pilot partners, on the Northern Beaches, and 5.5% of people going through open homes were automatically having their email address updated. Now, they use ActivePipe, they use other email marketing tools. All of that is getting a 5.5% uplift for free.
And I think it's a really important conversation, is that ultimately what you're trying to do is to realize that you can't be Superman or Superwoman. You can't do it all. And you've actually got to have great systems that can do the lifting. And ultimately those systems can give you great insights around what it is to go and do next. Let's talk a bit about like best in practice and best in breed. I think that you've got to make a decision as an agency about how you want to go to serve customers. Customer experience is brand, and brand is pricing power. So what we've got to do now is we're saying, okay, great, this is not a conversation I might do it on 1 or 2. This is on everything. So, okay, great. So how do we do that? We include it into our vendor marketing campaigns. That is one of the line items. That's how we teach it in at Blueprint as well, because it's a really interesting, simple thing in terms of your actual statement of what you're going to be doing on the marketing side. And you talk to sellers about how what I do is I iron out friction. So I do not want a $1,000 building issue becoming a $50,000 negotiation item. And if there's a rectification or something that we should do, then ultimately we should get that done, or at least get a quote. So then that way, when the buyer brings that up as an issue, I can show a third-party quote about how to get that particular item resolved if you're not prepared to complete or to update that particular item. And I just think that, to me, it's just a very clean way of doing residential real estate, knowing exactly what it is that you're selling. And I know this sounds crazy, but there was an era you would drive past secondhand car yards and that have like all of these cars have been checked by NRMA. And the signal that it sent to my mind was, NRMA, oh, wow. So like literally a mechanic has gone over that and has done their, PETA's 64-point suspension check. They've told me that it's actually safe. Great. And I just feel so much easier about that process. And I think that what you've got to realize, consumers find stuff at different times in the journey. And it would be amazing that every buyer finds the property day 1 of it launching to run through your 21 or 28-day auction campaign. But I am also a victim myself of not looking online, all of a sudden one day, seeing something online, going to the open house at 3:30 p.m, then realising that the auction is at 4 o'clock that day. And I know that that's extreme, but that it happened to me at a property in Balmain. And geez, I wish they had a copy of the Pest and Building Report available.
It happens every weekend, Josh. And I'll say, so we kind of send out, surveys to our agents, and their estimate is about an extra 0.5 or 20% of registered bidders when they've got a report up front than when they don't. So those people who turn up late, or there's people who hate auctions, and they're scared of them, they're anxious about them, they don't want to spend $500 and miss out. So all those people, when you've got a $49, $59, $69 report, they're available. All those people who turn up the morning of, like that Will Ainsworth example or your example, they're going to be there and they're going to be bidding. And that extra 20% of registered bidders could be the one that either gets you over reserve if you're a real estate agent, or maximize that price and gets a big number for your vendor.
Yeah, that's right. And every campaign has a story, Josh. And, we look at a lot of the campaigns that get the Building and Pest report. So when they get it up front and they start the campaign, the amount of campaigns where the successful buyer of the home bought the report, they were the first person to buy the report or in the first week and then waited 3 or 4 weeks to actually go on to buy the property, it's insane, right? And I think if agents really started to look at these things and focus on these things, the conversation that you can have with those buyers about, trying to negotiate faster, get a premium price for the listing as well. Like it's, there's just so many things that you can do.
And private treaty sales, you can just get those
Absolutely.
subject to offers down. Like we've got Brian at Druin. He's got his private Peter Clark, is he? Yeah, Peter Clark. And he's got his subject to offers down from about 95% to sub 50% by having these reports up front. He's like, look, some people still want to get their own. That's fine. I'll let them. But by having this there, I'm saving a lot of time and being a much more efficient agent and being able to get more listings.
So, Rhys, what's best practice here, like about how an agent integrates? Like, do you have it on your agency website? How does it work with the major real estate portals? Is it like there's a QR code on every brochure? What's the best practice of what you've seen for encouraging consumers to A, know that the reports are available, and B, making it easy for them to get access to those reports?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to Phil Resnikov. So he's got us in the VPA. He's got our BYB Assist, our text message that goes out to every single buyer going through his open home. We've sent him the QR code as soon as the order's gone through. So he prints that off. He has it at the open home and he puts that in any email marketing that goes to anyone else as well on top of the BYB Assist text messaging service. We're also integrated with Domain. So that's on every single listing across the country with live pricing there. Johnny, anything I missed there?
Yeah, no. Look,
Sorry, I have seen someone put the QR code in their signboards, so they get it really early, so that you'll walk past that open home and it'll be like, download the building and pest inspection if you want as well in their signboard. Which, I found that really interesting that they just see the data is so valuable that they're like, we're willing to let people off the street download this thing.
And where I found it was actually in the email inquiry response. So when I actually asked for a price guide on a particular property in New South Wales, and they came back and they said, oh, hey, by the way, here's the price guide, here's the next open for inspection time, and here's how you get a copy of the pest and building report.
yeah. Look, I think that the important thing to remember about BYB, Josh, is that, we don't mandate the use of our products. We don't charge agency subscriptions. We just know that once agents start to use us for a few campaigns, it just becomes a part of their campaign schedule and, probably the most important part as well. I was actually just out seeing Jake Rowe from the agency in Manly last week. Jake had placed the 100,000th order for an inspection, which was really exciting, and Jake was very excited, and I was there to give him a bottle of champagne and say thank you.
Geez, he's done a lot of audits.
He has. well, overall.
Kidding.
But the funny thing was, Jake asked, what's keeping you busy? And I said, look, we're just going around the country just trying to get agents to understand that the most important thing they can do is put a building and pest report in the sales campaign. He said, what do you mean? Do agents not do that already? And I said, you'd be surprised, Jake. A lot don't. And he was like, well, this property that I just sold it in 2 weeks. And that was because there was no obstacle or barrier to getting an exchange for that property.
And that report was only downloaded once.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we get it downloaded 10, 20 times, but he's like, mate, I had one buyer at that price point, which would have got across the line, and I had the report ready to go, and they were looking at other things. If I didn't have that report ready to go, they might, their eyes might get distracted onto something else, and then suddenly I've got a listing that goes, a lot longer than it needs to, or I don't sell it.
John, if someone is listening around the country and they wanted to either get some further information or get some questions answered about how it would work in their business or certainly in their marketplace, how would they get in contact with Before You Bid?
Oh, easily. Just, look us up on the website.
Which is?
What's that?
What's the website address?
beforeyoubid.com.au.
You got your radio voice on there.
Exactly. Like I said, LinkedIn, Facebook, we're very accessible, but, I'm just about to fly out to Melbourne, to talk to a group down there, a leading independent group. They're just about to mandate it through every office. We are busy. Spring is here. We are just helping agents, be prepared for their campaigns and their appraisals moving forward.
So I think that's a really important part. If you've got any additional questions, the guys can help you out just over a phone or a Zoom very quickly. If you are in a position that you might need them to do something face-to-face next time they're in the area, there's definitely the chance to be able to go and do that, and certainly to have a come and chat at the office. Right?
24/7, Josh, 24/7.
we got team members in, Victoria, Queensland, WA, SA, so
and New South Wales,
and New South Wales, obviously. They're ready to go, pitching, all the time. So if you want them to come out, they'd love to see you.
Well, John and Rhys, thanks so much for answering all of those objections and challenges I know a lot of agents have faced in this area. It's really about just getting confidence with the skill, building that capability of learning how to sell it into your VPA, smoothing out the process with both buyers and sellers, and gaining incredible insights on who are the next people that are going to be buying and selling in your marketplace by providing a frictionless consumer experience when it comes to buying and selling property.